Welcome to the Rational Patriot Podcast, where common sense meets the Constitution. We're here to cut through the noise, defend our freedoms, and give you the facts without the fluff. Whether you're here to save the country or just looking for a break from the endless spin, we've got you covered. Buckle up, Patriots. It's time to get rational.
Hello, my friends, Patriots and Americans. Thank you so much for joining us today on this wonderful Monday on the Rational Patriot Podcast. We're so glad you're here, whether you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, whether you're over on Spotify, or whether you're watching us right here on YouTube. We are so glad that you're here. Appreciate all your support. I want to tell you, X has really been growing for us. If you're not following us over there, head on over to X. Give us a follow at Dustin Ellis Ohio. You just never know what you'll see us getting into. But yeah, let's go ahead and get on into today's show. And that is the Swamp Fights Back. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, that is that, as we all know now, Matt Gaetz has dropped out of the race to become the Attorney General for Donald Trump. And while some people are surprised by this, I'm not exactly surprised by it. I knew Gaetz was going to be a tough confirmation and that he was going to have struggles, especially with Rhino Republicans. And when you've got your former employer, which is the House of Representatives, fighting against you as you're trying to go into a new job, and that's got to be confirmed by none other than the Senate, that's going to make things very tough for you. Seemed like he was starting to gain some traction, but Mitch McConnell definitely didn't want him to have that job, and there were several others that didn't want him to have that job. So he withdrew his name. And I noticed towards the tail end of the week and, into the weekend, a lot of the MAGA crew getting very discouraged by this. And I don't want you to get discouraged, because this may not be the only pick that Trump has set forth that has to be confirmed that may not get confirmation. Things come out. You would think these people had been elected officials or on TV or in the military, that their background would have been vetted already. But when you get into politics at this game, especially when you're working with Donald Trump, the Democrats and the left are going to do everything that they can and throw everything they can at you to try to stop you, destroy you, get rid of your credibility, whatever it takes to fight you back. So he's now been replaced by Florida former AG Pam Bondi. While I personally don't believe that she's the firebrand conservative and just, the loyalist that Matt Gaetz is, I don't think she's going to have a problem getting confirmed. She's more of a traditional inline pick, which is something that Trump doesn't do a lot of. Now, you can see with this Surgeon General pick, which has caused some outcry from folks, that, he tends to sometimes, confuse people. You go with a guy like Matt Gaetz, and I know people are saying, he was playing 4D chess. This was the plan all along, to get the Rhino Republicans to come out. And I mean, that's always a possibility. When you're dealing with a billionaire and you're dealing with someone who's been president and who just works the way that Donald Trump does, I mean, there's always that possibility that that's what's going on. But I am a realist, and I'm not someone that is constantly out here going to take up for Donald Trump or any politician for that matter and say, oh, this was their plan all along. I know this seems like it backfired, but really they knew what they were doing, because that's just not generally how it works in Washington, D.C. But I don't think she's going to have a problem getting confirmed. But the truth of the matter is, the tanking of Matt Gaetz was another case of the Republicans working with the Democrats to get their agenda pushed through. Several Republicans did not want, when we'll never know the full number, I don't believe, want Matt Gaetz to become the AG. And so they decided, none of the Democrats were going to vote for him. So you get a few Republicans decide with the Democrats and voting against him. And it just makes it to where there's no path forward for the guy to get confirmed. And therefore, he drops out and says, hey, look, I'm not going to be a distraction. I'm not going to hinder this process, and I'm done. My problem is this aggravates me so much. And if you go back in several years throughout the history of politics, and from, we'll say 2000 to now, almost 25 years, the Republicans have this great history, and it goes back further, but they have this great history in the modern era of working with the Democrats in, the sake of unity and bipartisanship. But the problem is the Democrats really don't work with the Republicans. And so you end up with this, it should be a you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back scenario, but they never get their back scratched. And so while you see here Republicans siding with the Democrats to end a confirmation for Matt Gaetz, are you going to see a case to where when we have a Democratic president, where Republican or Democrats are going to side with Republicans to stop some leftist from getting on the Supreme Court, some radical, or we're going to see them stop an attorney general on there? I don't think we're going to see that. And you rarely see that. And it's happened in some cases, don't get me wrong. But the majority of the time, you see the Republicans doing the giving and the Democrats are doing the taking, and we get nothing in return for it. And that's the problem. And that's why the GOP and the voter base gets so upset with these things, because it just doesn't make sense to do things that way. I understand there has to be times of bipartisanship, and there should be more of it. But when one side is not willing to give, why would you side with them when it's not going to work out? So the Democrats work very well within their party, and the Republican Party, well, as you've seen with what happened in the House with Kevin McCarthy and Matt Gaetz, we have a lot of infighting. And what this really boils down to, and I've taken some notes here because I did some studying into this, and I just really wanted to make sure, what I've heard from other folks and what I've observed was actually factual. And that is, throughout the past 25 years, we've seen the Democratic Party shift more towards socialism, and the Republican Party has shifted more towards the old line Democratic policies. That's just fact. The Democrats have always had what many of us would label socialist tendencies and theology, but the core Democratic voter was a working class individual, urban, minorities, and women, while Republican core voters have always been very religious, whites, and rural voters, okay? While now the Republicans have shifted to the blue-collar voters and the minorities under Trump's campaign, which we see is the largest reason why he won this November, was he outperformed with male black voters, and he outperformed in several other categories that people didn't anticipate happening. So as the Democratic Party has had this shift to socialism and to some just crazy ideologies, the Republicans have kind of followed them. And so you get this blending of where Republicans are now supporting things that they wouldn't have supported in the past, and Democrats are abandoning things that they would have supported in the past, like Joe Biden and Barack Obama saying they support traditional marriage. You can find that. They campaigned on it, and it's between a man and a woman. And then you see at the tail end of Obama's presidency and under Biden that the White House is lit up in the rainbow colors, and their support for the LGBTQ. I'm not even going to insult anyone or try to remember what all those letters and names are. But I mean, that's the shift that you've seen just in a few years. And, I think it was last week on the podcast, how far things have come just in the last 4 years, where now we have a representative who's been elected to the U.S. representative as a congressperson. I don't know whether to say congresswoman or congressman, but he's a biological male who now identifies as a woman and wants to use the woman's restroom. And so now the infighting in Congress is a bill being passed to try to stop that from being allowed. And so I believe it's Representative Mace who went and put a sign up in Congress over the woman's restroom, and it said biological females. And so these are the things that they weren't happening before, and they're happening now. So Trump has tried to bring the Republican Party back to its core conservative values and set it apart from the Democrats, while the Democrats have just kept going further and further to the left, and their core voters abandoned them because of it, while they've gained, college voters, and they've gained, college educated voters and those that are in college, but they've lost that blue collar vote, and they've lost any votes that they had in rural counties, different counties. I mean, you see, Trump was the first Republican, and I forget how many elections, to flip Bucks County, Pennsylvania. And I believe that's a big showing of these voters are not okay with these radical left policies. And while many of us are not okay with radical right-hand policies and extremist beliefs, Trump in some areas has pushed that line, but he's also tried to bring the core of lower taxes, secure the border. Let's not be in a bunch of wars. And that's really what sets off a lot of the rhinos and the warmongers, is his fact that, he wants peace through strength, but not through war. And, that's been the motto. We want peace through strength, but that doesn't mean that we're bombarding people and sending troops on the ground everywhere. So we got to understand something. The biggest reason that the DC establishment and the swamp isn't happy with Trump, and they're fighting so hard and they're fighting back with all they got, is not the conservative value so much that he represents, because we've had conservative presidents in the past. I mean, by today's standard, George Bush Jr. was a conservative. And I mean, you go back even further and you could say Jimmy Carter was somewhat of a conservative compared to Barack Obama or compared to Kamala Harris or Joe Biden. But that now it's just so different. So they're not fighting him because he's a conservative and his conservative values, but rather his attacks on what's become the "you scratch my back and I'll scratch your back" club that makes the American people so mad, especially the Republican voters. They don't want to see that. That's not what they want. The Republican voters elect you to be a conservative, and we want you to lead as a conservative, and we want you to vote as a conservative, and we want you to pass bills and draft bills that are conservative. And so he's saying, look, I'm going to end this. These are my MAGA candidates. These are my MAGA appointments. And that's how things are going to be. And then he's also threatening to out those who say, hey, I'm a conservative. And then you vote and your record says completely different on so many issues. While he's not been perfect at this, he's been good enough at it that the DC swamp is fighting with everything they have because they're terrified. Because there are things that we see with our own eyes. We see how legacy media is dying and the mainstream media is dying because of their blatant lies and their favorable coverage towards one candidate and their unfavorable coverage towards another. And one way you can see this where it becomes so frustrating is you take left-wing media like CNN, and they're going to attack a candidate like Donald Trump. And they're going to be very favorable to someone like Kamala Harris. But then you go over to Fox News, and of course, they're going to attack Kamala Harris. But then there are times when they're going to go ahead and attack Donald Trump, which would show that they're fair and balanced, which is a good thing. But it shows why the American people get so upset, because it's like, well, who do I believe? Because if you would have listened to the mainstream media, Donald Trump would have lost in just a complete beatdown. There would have been no chance for him to win. But instead, what happened is the American people came out, and now I'm seeing this. It's completely aggravating to me, is, this was not a mandate by the American people. It was a mandate. He won with 312 electoral college votes. Let's just get that clear. 312. It was a mandate. He's almost up to 77 million popular votes. It was a mandate. Okay. I know you don't want to accept that, but it's fact. All right. So that's why they're fighting him, not because of his conservative values, as in the sense of the policies and his views on war and his views on taxes, why they don't agree with those things. And at some point, we'll do a deep dive into why I believe that they don't agree with those things. Their biggest fear is his plan to shrink government and his plan to end government overreach and to abolish various departments. And that's why the topic that we're on today is why the swamp is fighting back. So we must understand something. All of Trump's picks are going to be guilty of something. They're going to be guilty of association with Donald Trump. That's why the rhinos and Democrats will have a problem with nearly all of them. You are seeing this. It started out with Pete Hegseth and that, he's a Fox News host. And then once people started realizing the truth again, when they were not listening to the mainstream media, that the guy was a veteran, the guy was a decorated veteran, now he's a rapist. Okay. So the talking points on X and the mainstream media, MSNBC, MSNBC is what it's really called, CNN, which I heard a great conservative friend of mine call the Clinton News Network. But, as these folks talk, he's a rapist and Donald Trump's a rapist and everyone that's going to be in his cabinet are going to be rapists, or they're going to be guilty of crimes, or they're going to be felons because Donald Trump is a convicted felon. Well, here, let's get to the truth of that. Donald Trump's not been sentenced. And until you're sentenced, he's not really a felon. So let's get that straight as we've seen that. But these picks are going to be guilty of that one thing, and that is guilty by association. You're going to hear things like we've already heard from Pam Bondi is how Trump paid her off to get her to not investigate Trump University. You're going to hear things like Pete Hegseth. he's a rapist. Like we heard about Matt Gaetz, he was paying underage prostitutes and doing all these morally incorrect and horrible things. Let's be clear about something. And I said this on TikTok the other day. So if you're not following me there, go follow me, because I will put little tidbits out through the week when the show's not on. And that is, simply put, if we're going to release every ethics investigation out there on politicians while they've been in office for morally, unmoral things that they've done, then we need to release it for everybody. We can't just pick and choose when we're going to come out and talk about these people and say, oh, wait, this guy's about to become AG, or this lady's about to become the head of Treasury, or whatever it is. So now we need to let everybody know that, she took a bribe, or he had an illicit relationship outside of his marriage. I mean, we need to release it all. If the American people need to know about it, then the American people need to know about it, but they don't want that. So I want you to be prepared, because we're still in the very beginning stages of this. Trump's not inaugurated until January 20th. This is going to be a fight leading up to this. The WWE pick. Oh, everybody just wants to focus on that. That's now. There'll be more news on that. Tulsi Gabbard talking about how, her travels were flagged as suspicious because she was some kind of foreign asset to Russia or other countries. I mean, these are the things that are going to keep pumping them out and pumping them out. So that way, when we get to the hearings and we get to the confirmations, the American people are going to have trust issues with every one of these appointees. So I want you to be prepared for that all of these candidates are guilty of something. They're guilty by association. And while some of them, sure, they could have skeletons in their closet that I don't know about, that Trump doesn't know about, or that he doesn't anticipate someone finding out about. And if they're disqualified, they're disqualified. I mean, that's when I say, I'm rational when I understand my views on things. And I want you guys to be rational on that if something comes out on somebody and it is true and it is based in facts, we don't want them appointed, and we want to distance ourselves from them. But they're all going to be guilty of something. And the main thing they're going to be guilty of is guilty by association. And that's the problem. So just be prepared for that, and don't be blindsided by it. All right, let's go ahead and get ready to jump into the last word of reason.
And now for the last word of reason with your favorite Patriot, Dustin Ellis.
All right, guys, today's last word of reason is Pam Bondi has been appointed to be the new AG for Trump after Matt Gaetz drops out. She's been congratulated by Jeb Bush. She's been congratulated by Lindsey Graham and other establishment rhinos. They celebrate the pick of Pam Bondi. So the last word of reason, and the question to you is her stance on red flag laws and the celebrations by those that we know to be established rhinos and those that are not for the MAGA agenda and the Trump agenda wholeheartedly, is that enough reason for us to be concerned with her being the pick? I believe it's worth watching, to watch her, but only, and not only that, but also to check this out. Are there people within the Trump transition team who are leading and guiding him on picks, who are once again, like what happened in 2016, trying to set him up to have rhinos in positions of power to keep the administration in check and to make sure that his agenda doesn't go forward in the way that he wants it to, and that they're able to keep things in place that they want to keep in place. That's the last word of reason for today, and I really believe that it bears watching, and we've got to be careful with this. But thank you so much for listening and watching to today's podcast. We appreciate you guys so much. Hope you have a great rest of your week, and we're going to see you right back here on Friday, day after Thanksgiving. Be sure to follow us over on X, Truth Social. Check out our website, therationalpatriot.com. But until next time, we'll catch you later. God bless you, and we appreciate you so much.